Well, welcome, and we'll start off with a bracha. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. And of course, this is a big parsha because it's not a long parsha. It's actually a very short parsha, but it's a big parsha because it has, of course, the first time we encounter the Aseret Hadibrot, the Ten Commandments. And it's named Yitro, which is sort of very interesting, I think, that the Parsha of Aseret Hadibrot is named Yitro, which of course is the name of Moses' father-in-law. And of course, he started off life as a priest of Midian. So he was actually an idolater. And I think to myself, what significance does this have? And possibly one way one could look at it is how life-changing studying of Torah can be, and how it can just totally alter the course of your life, as it did for Yitro. So here goes. And of course, also the way in which the Torah is described, the giving of the Torah is given in this parsha is very dramatic. Here goes. Vayishma Yitro, Kohen Midian, Jethro, the priest of Midian, heard. Choten Moshe, I'm sorry, I needed one more descriptive of Yitro. Not only was he a priest of Midian, but he was Moses' father-in-law. And that's sort of an interesting apposition of ideas, right? Priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law. They don't exactly travel together. And but he heard something. Et kol asher asa Elohim leMoshe. And everything that Elohim had done, in this case, I would say for Moses, Uli Yisrael Amor, and for Israel, his people. And of course, it's not clear who the his is here, whether it's referring to Moses' people or whether it's referring to God's people. And that, in fact, Jethro recognized that there was a unique relationship between the children of Israel and their God. Ki hotzi Hashem et Yisrael, for Hashem had brought Israel out of Egypt, Mitzrayim. So he gets news, he gets word. And we'll go into the Rashi here. Vayishma Yitro. So the question is, Ma Shmu'a Shama Uva. So what news did he hear that he came? He decided he would pay a visit. So Rashi tells us, Kriyat Yam Suf, the splitting of the sea, of reeds, the Milchemet Amalek, and the battle against Amalek. Some comments on the name Yitro. Sheva Shemot Nikra'u Lo, he was actually given 7 names. You can count them. Reuel, Yeter, Yitro, Chovav, Chever, Kini, Putiel. So if you count them, obviously you're going to get to 7. He had these 7 names. And Rashi goes on to explain a few of those names. And this, of course, is from the Mechilta, that halachic midrash. Yeter, he was called Yeter, al Shem she'yiter parsha achat b'Torah. The reason he was called Yeter is because he added a paragraph to the Torah. And the paragraph is the one where he tells Moses, Va'ata techazeh, you should look out for, and he's talking about wise and understanding leaders to divide up the work of administering the Torah. So when the Torah stays in heaven, that means we all sort of respect it and say what a wonderful thing it is. But if the Torah is going to come down to earth and actually affect people's lives, well, it involves the administration of justice, and You may be familiar already with the story about how Jethro comes and sees Moses judging the people from morning until night. And Moses explains what he's doing to Jethro. And Jethro basically says to Moses, "You keep that up, and you're going to experience burnout. And what you need to do is you have to look and see what capable people you can find to help you do this." And that's the added parsha. So if you think about it, that is really significant because it is it was advice that Moses gave that Jethro gave Moses that would allow the Torah to actually be effective, and that the Torah could be used as an effective tool to administer justice. And then the whole notion of division of labor, right there in the Torah. No one person can do it by themselves, even if they're extremely capable. And Moses, of course, was one of a kind, but nobody can do it like that. So that was the brilliant advice that Jethro gave Moses. And the good news is that Moses listened to his father-in-law. Yitro, he was called Yitro. The Keshenit Gayer, there is a tradition based on the words of the Torah that he was a ger, that he converted to Judaism, that he gave up his idolatry and he became an Israelite, so to speak, or a member of the Jewish people. Vekiyem hamitzvot, and he upheld the mitzvot, he practiced the mitzvot. Hosifulo, and because of this, because that was a life-changing decision on his part, Hosifulo ot achat al shmo, they added one letter to his name. And we've seen examples of this, such as Avram became Avraham when he became circumcised, when he accepted the Brit. We have seen other examples. Chovav, another name, Chovav, and that is Shechibev et HaTorah, because he loved the Torah. He showed great affection for the Torah. Chovav v'chovav hu Yitro, and the fact that Chovav and Yitro are one and the same. Shne'emar, that's how we know that this name Chovav applies to Jethro. Shne'emar, because it says in the book of Judges, chapter 4, Mibnei Chovav Choten Moshe, that these people that they're referring to in this particular chapter is they were the offspring of Chovav, the father-in-law of Moses. The
Um,
Yeshomrim. Yeah, go
I have
ahead.
a question. I
Sure.
mean, just about the word chovav, which I thought was related to chiyuv or responsibility, as opposed to ohev, which I thought meant love. So
Yes.
I'm confused about chovav.
Okay. So basically, lechavev someone is to have affection for them, and it's a step down from to love someone. And Shira Beth may have some thoughts about how it's used in modern Hebrew, but I believe that it is used to describe an affection that one has. So, for example, there's a term chovavei tzion. This was a actually an organized group early on in the modern Zionism, as to those who had affection for Zion. Shirabeth,
Yeah,
am I
excuse me.
accurate about that, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's chaviv. Chaviv is a commonly used word, and it means
Oh,
likable or lovable.
yeah, I've heard of like in Arabic, I think habibi.
Habibi,
Yes.
same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
and
Okay.
the Hebrew word for a hobby is a tachbiv.
I'm
Hmm.
just because I hear something like that when people are talking about chiyuvim. They talk about they. I've heard something that sounds like the word chovav.
It could.
Well,
So
It.
chiyuv is like an obligation, yeah, or a
I know.
debt.
Okay.
Yes, I know.
Okay. If I can
Yeah.
say, I think there is a connection. For one, because a vav and a yud are connected letters, they're associated letters, and not only that, ayin verbs like chovav, where the second and third letters are the same, are directly related to ayin vav verbs or ayin yud verbs. So they are connected, and there may well be a connection between the idea of a chiyuv, where you feel obligated, because when you have a relationship with someone else of affection, if you like them a lot, you do feel certain obligations towards them, knowing how to, because one primary, how can I put it, expression of love is the desire to fulfill the will of the person you love. To know that you're doing something that pleases them is part of showing affection. So I think, Lauren, that you're right, actually, that there really is an etymological connection between chiyuv and chovev. And that's trying to spell out what the connection could be. Thank you for asking the question. V'yesh omrim, and there are those who say, Reuel, that Reuel, which was one of the names we said he had, Aviv shel Yitro haya, that in fact Reuel was Yitro's father. Umahu omer, so how do we account for Vatavona el Reuel avihem, that in Exodus chapter 2, which describes Moses' flight to Midian, and at that experience at the well, and then the daughters go back, and it says they said to Reuel, their father, about this man that came and saved them from the other shepherds. She hatinokot, you explain that by saying, hatinokot, that very young children, korin la'avi avehem, that they call their grandfather Abba, that very often they will refer to their grandfather as father. Well, papa, papi, whatever. And that's in the Sifrei. That's in the Sifrei. Choten Moshe, Moses' father-in-law. And this again now is from the Mechilta. Kan haya Yitro mitkaved b'Moshe. Here, calling himself Choten Moshe, or when the scripture refers to him as Moses' father-in-law, it says Jethro was honoring himself, felt honored through Moses. In other words, Ani Choten HaMelech. I happen to be the father-in-law of the king. Avar, but prior to that, Haya Moshe Tole Hagdula Bechamav. In that case, Moses would give the honor to his father-in-law, Shne'emar, as it says, Vayeshev El Yeter Chotno. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to think. This probably comes from. If it was he returned to Jether, then it would be Vayashov El Yeter Chotno, that he returned to Yeter. We said that's one of the names for Jethro, Chotno, his father-in-law. So it's like here down in Los Altos, I'm Sarah's dad, okay? But up in Santa Rosa, Sarah is my daughter. So that's subtlety. So this is the goodness that God did for Moses and for Israel. Shakul Moshe, Moses is balanced, keneged kol Yisrael, to the entire children of Israel, all the Israelites. He is worth all of them. Et kol asher asa, all that he did, that is all that God did, lahem, for them, b'yeridat Haman, in the descent of the manna, uva va'er, and with the well, uva Amalek, and regarding the battle of Amalek. So that's for them, lahem. Ki hotzi Hashem v'gomer, and in addition, of course, the Torah explicitly says, for he brought them out of Egypt. Zo gdola al kulam. This was the greatest miracle.
So regarding also the names, Reuel, I don't see exactly how it's spelled, but does it mean to see God?
Yes, it could come from that root, yes.
And that could also connect to his conversion.
Exactly, right. That he recognized God's miracles. Yes, he recognized the divine.
I have a note in my Tanakh
Yes.
at that spot with Reuel.
Okay.
And it says that he's in the line of Esau. And I must have written that down because somebody said that somewhere along the line. Not you necessarily, because we didn't get to that. We didn't do that part because I don't think.
You know, I don't remember by heart, so to speak, the genealogies that are involved. And I'm wondering if actually I'd have to go back and check in Genesis to see whether Midian actually is from Ishmael. I'd have to go back as opposed to Esau. It doesn't sound like Esau to me, but it does sound like there's Medan and Midian, and I believe those are descendants of Ishmael.
Oh, okay. I don't know why I wrote that down there, but maybe I saw it at one point and flipped back and forth. I don't know.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'd keep it open. I wouldn't say.
Yeah, no, it's just I always, I'm writing all over my Tanakh. So yeah.
Okay. All right.
Well,
Well, good. You look at, yeah, go ahead.
The Resh Ayin in Reuel, I bet maybe it has something to do with Re'ah, like a friend.
Yes, it does. You are right, and that's correct. I had to look at it.
Friend of God.
Okay. Here's the point.
And not shepherd.
Okay. Yes, it could be. It could be reference. It definitely doesn't mean to see, because the ayin is different.
Right.
Ra'ah is an olive, and I wasn't paying attention to that when we originally talked about it. But it could absolutely be Re'ah, really referring to friend of God. That would be really nice.
And what about shepherd? No.
Yeah, well, he's not God. Okay, so maybe, then it would have to be shepherd of God, something like that, God's shepherd. And again, I wouldn't discount that. But the fact that he converted, I would tend to think the fact that he converted, friend of God would sound more appropriate if I were to give it a nod, if you follow what I'm saying.
Okay, and I don't know that word that you're using for friend, because all I know is chaver.
Right. No. Okay. So chaver is related to a word chibur, which means to connected. Okay. The chaber means to join something. Okay.
Right.
Where a re'ah has more to do with friendship, I believe. Right. It's a different in a way. There's a different sense of friendship from re'ah. Okay. Ohev is much more intense. Okay, whereas Re'ah has a gentler connotation to it, at least as I understand Hebrew. Let's see. Let's go into here. So Torah Tamima supplements a lot of what we just read in the Rashi, because here we go. Vayishma Yitro, Jethro heard. Ma Shmu'a Shama. What news did he hear? Uva v'nitgayer, that he came and he converted. He became Jewish, or it's of course anachronistic to say it like that, but that he joined himself to the Israelites. And it's down here. Halashon uva v'nitgayer, using this term came and converted. I mean, adding that part to it. Ba liyashev halashon comes to what it does is it settles down the expression ma shmu'a shama, of what shmu'a, what news did he hear? Because as a midrash, right, that's a problematic question, and he's going to tell you why that's a problematic question. De kasher, right, it doesn't make sense. Ha b'pasuk gufei ketiv mashama, because the verse itself tells you what he heard. So why is the midrash asking that question if the verse itself explicitly tells you what he heard? So that's why saying that he came to convert, adding that conversion element to it now makes sense, because the pasuk doesn't answer that question. So, and in other words, what did he hear? And he's telling you right here, Torah Tamim is telling you right here, Et kol asher asa Elohim v'gomer, everything that Elohim had done. That's right there in the pasuk. V'al zeh miyashev v'lashon uva v'nitgayer. And regarding this, it makes sense now to say he came and converted. In other words, this additional element. What did he hear that he actually converted? Not simply what did he hear and he came. Klomar, that is to say, Eze shmu'ah, what piece of news, what information, orara oto lehitkarev lashem, what exactly was it that he heard that awoke him the desire to draw close to God? Let's see if I can do anything here. Okay, sorry. Having some issues here. Ula Yisrael, and to the Jewish people. That's sort of interesting that converting, being a ger, isn't just a matter of drawing close to God. It's also to the Jewish people. And see what is written. This is simply a cross-reference, a similar kind of interpretation. The Parshat Chukat, in the Parsha of Chukat, which is in the book of Numbers, the Pasuk where it says, Vayishma HaKna'ani. And there it says, and the Canaanites heard, and it uses the same term, Vayishma. So we get some answers here in looking at this. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, Rabbi Yehoshua says, Milchemet Amalek Shama. He heard about the battle against Amalek. Shaharei Kativ Betzido, because right next to it, in other words, this a parsha that precedes this parsha, right before. Vayechalosh Yehoshua et Amalek. Or Vayechalosh, I'd have to look at the pointing there. Yehoshua et Amalek, that Joshua weakened Amalek. The et Amo and his people, the Ficharev, by means of the sword. And there's a Torah Tamima here. Halashon Sheharei, using this term Sheharei, okay, that's that specific word, kan here, nir'ah shemechaven lidrosh smuchin de derech chazal b'chama mekamot. He says that using the term harei, see here, sheharei, right, indicates the fact that he's using the fact that the battle of Amalek immediately precedes. It's connected, as it were. Samuch means nearby. So there's nothing intervening between that parsha and this parsha. And he's saying that's and that is a classic way of deriving interpretation in the Torah by looking at the position. You know what they say? Location, location, location. And since that previous subject is the battle against Amalek, we're saying that's what Jethro heard, that awoke in him the desire to associate with the Jewish people. Rabbi Elazar HaModai Omer, Rabbi Elazar the Modai says, Matan Torah Shama Uva. He heard about the giving of the Torah, and that's why he came to become a member of the Jewish people. So this is interesting, and this is a very important point that is now coming up, and Torah Tamima will mention this. There are those who say that even though this parsha is written before Matan Torah, is written before the giving of the Torah, chronologically it's out of place. It actually happened after the giving of the Torah. And so, of course, that simply raises a different question, which is why? Why should it be put before the giving of the Torah? And I think one can come up with a few answers. One is that, and this is the point that I had made before about the parsha, that additional parsha that Jethro gave by telling Moses to divide up the work of administering the Torah. And that is that this implication that the giving of the Torah, as significant as it was, would be far less significant if there weren't a way to actually apply it to life. And I think that's actually a profound idea, because there are many people who will show a lot of respect for the concept of Torah, but fail to attempt to bring it down to earth. And this, Torah in the heaven and being brought down to earth is such a great metaphor and symbolic of how taking ideas and then finding ways to actually apply them and make them effective. There's a long distance between those two things. And we can be very comfortable in principle about things like this, but when it comes to actually applying them into our lives, there's a lot of discomfort and, in fact, almost a neglect. And Jethro was helping Moses accomplish the actual practice of Torah, and that's why it comes before the giving of the Torah itself. Now, there are reasons to consider it out of place, because later on, and we may get to it, Jethro is telling Moses to apply. Moses is telling Jethro how he's teaching them the Torah. But if they haven't gotten the Torah yet, how's Moses doing this? So that's why there's some strong arguments to say that this particular parsha is out of place. And that's why Rabbi Elazar Mordai can say what he's saying, that Jethro heard about the giving of the Torah to the Jewish people. Ukeshenitna Torah la'amo Yisrael. But he goes on to say that when the Torah was given to his people Israel, that is, of course, God's people, haya kolo holech misof ha'olam va'ad sofo. God's voice went from one end of the universe to the other end, to its other end. Okay, so again, let's take a look, because Torah Tamima has something to say about that. So we'll look at it quickly. Usfirale. So this is the point, right? He holds that Rabbi Elazar Hamodai holds that Parsha Zo, that this particular Parsha, Lo Ne'emara al Haseder, that is, this chapter wasn't said in order. It's out of order. The Af Diktiva Hi Kodem Parshat Matan Torah, that even though it's written in the Torah prior to the section of the giving of the Torah, Bechol Zot, nevertheless, the emet heve inyana, that its subject matter la'achar matan Torah came after the giving of the Torah, and that makes sense as we go through the actual verses. You'll see the iyen besamuch, and look, he says he's giving you a reference, but Rasha Ola Uzvachim. We actually, I think, talked about this. There was a very a very complicated, it might have been even in the Rashi, where he was talking about what sacrifices people brought before Matan Torah. Maybe some of you remember that, and how they were saying that people only brought olot, they only brought olot, whole offerings, prior to the giving of the Torah. And how come we read about how Jethro is bringing zevach, right? Zvachim, ola uzvachim, bepasuk yudbet, in verse 12, which is coming up. But back there we had discussed the idea of what offerings were being brought. I believe we discussed it. So there was another point, but it's 8 o'clock now. So, oh yes, the idea of God's voice at the giving of the Torah, going from one end of the universe to the other end of the universe. So I think that is actually symbolic and a metaphor, and I'm going to put a marking in here so that we can start tomorrow at this place. That is the significance of the notion of divine law and applied to human beings. The idea that human beings would, in fact, respond to divine law and live their lives centered on this particular practice has universal significance, has powerful universal significance. And I would, for the moment, allow you to connect the dots. And I'm going to stop the share and also we'll stop the recording. That was, sorry, hold a second. There we go. And I'll stop the recording.